Cyberpunk 2077 left many players outraged by the sheer number of bugs and critical flaws it had, but for those of us who played New Vegas at launch, it was nothing new. FNV is now considered by many as one of the best RPGs of all time. But forums and gaming sites from 2010 are littered with posts recounting a laundry list of glitches. Like this gem from user City Squirrel. When I went out the back door after getting the mission, Old Lady Gibson and her dogs were sitting/floating in midair. Then they became hostile. Bugs range from ghost typewriters to corrupted saves, NPCs dying for no apparent reason, missing textures, death claws that were invulnerable to explosives, moonwalking dogs, unplayable frame rates, quest-breaking bugs, and much more. However, over the following 9 months, Obsidian fixed a staggering number of these bugs in a series of impressive patches. Its first patch came only a day after its release, but a full list of changes was never provided because, as lead producer Jason Bergman explained, it would have been the length of a novel. Future patches did include notes for some changes, but many of them were never elaborated on either, and can only be discovered by comparing the initial release to the final patch. So just how broken was FNV? For the first 2 months of FNV's release, ant nectar addiction was completely incurable. Here I've injected enough ant nectar into my eyeballs to be fiending for more, but no matter how many times I try to get clean, I'm still hooked. Like every game utilizing Bethesda's engine, New Vegas had a large number of exploits that could be used to level up quickly. Most of these involved looping dialogue checks, but some of them were more memorable. For instance, one exploit was used on the forecaster at the 188 trading post. The Sandman perk could be used against him, but since children are marked as essential, he'd never die. For whatever reason, the perk animation doesn't play in this situation, and instead the player gets into bed with him before gaining 50 experience. Performing this glitch teleported me into a rock at Black Mountain and trapped me forever. After killing Big Sal during the Omerta's questline, you could attack his corpse and would receive 50 experience for every hit, which has gotta be one of the best exploits in gaming history. Dead NPCs would sometimes randomly fly across the map and morph into something straight out of a H.P. Lovecraft book. It was a regular occurrence to find NPCs and creatures clipping through the floor, walls, or ceiling, sometimes making them impossible to kill and breaking quests in the process. Other NPCs would just freeze and stop attacking you in the middle of a fight. AI pathing was poorly set up in many areas, to the point where NPCs and creatures would constantly bump into each other while moving around. One of my favorite glitches is definitely this kid power sliding like a rock star while eating raw rat. There's an issue of Duck and Cover found at the tent at Ranger Station Foxtrot. In the original release, it was actually placed inside the cut bunker found outside the tent, but since the entrance to the bunker was always disabled, it was impossible for the player to reach. When the dev team noticed this later on, they patched it to appear inside the tent instead. The abandoned Brotherhood of Steel bunker where the Dead Money DLC is started was originally unlocked, and I think the idea was to tease the DLC before its release. FNV's first patch locked the entrance, however, and it could only be opened with a non-existent key. It's possible the dev team later realized they'd have to update the bunker for the DLC, which would cause issues if the player decided to store weapons or armor there, or maybe it was never intended to be accessible at all. There's an issue of Dean's electronics here that became unattainable as a result, at least until Dead Money was released later in the year. The patch for Dead Money also completely changed the interior of the bunker. The entrance area originally only had a single piece of graffiti reading Sierra Madre, but Dead Money added in additional graffiti, posters, a dead NPC, bloodstains, lights, and more. The room that branches off to the left was much emptier as well, containing less loot, fewer props, and fewer connections to the DLC, resulting in a pretty forgettable location. Each object in the engine is assigned a unique form ID for identification, which is converted into a hexadecimal. When objects were edited or deleted in patches, existing form IDs of many assets changed. This had an unintended effect where every single mod that called for the old hexadecimals would break. One of these mod glitches was recounted by a fan commenting on one of the developer's blogs. You guys should really stop messing around so much with the existing form IDs at each patch. Now people are hearing the Beatrix Russell sex scene in a loop when using old, outdated mods. Hilarious sound effect, BT dubs. This next glitch is actually in the final game, but it's interesting enough that it deserves a mention. If you go up to this specific wall in the Ultralux bathhouse, you'll clip straight through it, and will then fall into the void before being warped back to the Center on Cell, or COC. As you're falling, you can see a floating room disconnected from the main area. By turning off collision and traveling over here, you can see this is where the assassin is stored for the quest beyond the beef. New Vegas really doesn't like you killing him though, as the frame rate almost immediately tanked and the game crashed not long after he died. The water inside the bathhouse, and in fact all the water in the game, once had a glitch that would make your hair invisible for some reason. You could get trapped inside this room in Vault 34 in the original release. There's only one exit, and sometimes it would lead to the void, you'd fall, then get warped to the COC, but the COC is bugged and you're trapped forever, even if you turn off collision in the console. The auto dock in Vault 34 was originally in the security station, which is located in the Vault 34C interior. In its place was an operating table, but a patch moved the auto dock from the security station to the clinic and deleted the operating table. This is one of those baffling changes I don't get. Many of FNV's weapons were altered in patches, but none of them were changed as heavily as the Tesla cannon and the Tesla beaten prototype. The Tesla cannon originally fired one shot per reload, and that shot cost 40 ECPs. Its attack caused a small explosion that dealt 25 damage over 2 seconds. Note that after firing, the electron charge pack on the back of the weapon ejects. It was patched to have a clip size of 20, and each shot only cost 5 ECPs, giving the player 4 shots before reloading. Because of the way it was altered, the ECP still ejects off the back after the first shot, then others magically appear as you fire. The Tesla beaten prototype was even worse, requiring 45 rounds for a single shot. Its magazine size was later altered to 24, and the shot cost was reduced to 6. These changes made them into more practical weapons, but the explosion effect was strangely disabled from their projectiles too. I have no idea why this was done, but it's too bad it was removed, as the explosion effect looked dope. Other energy weapons were also underpowered, and ammo for them was much scarcer in the original release, causing them to be heavily reworked in a patch. Josh Sawyer explained these changes in a Formspring post. Energy weapons, especially in the low and mid-range tier, were lacking prior to the last patch. The ammo and weapon modifications were to address general dissatisfaction with the energy weapons as a whole. For the next patch, the most ammo-hungry weapon, the Tesla cannon and Tesla beaten prototype, has had its consumption rate lowered significantly. It also behaves much differently and feels like a much better / more distinctive weapon. Every automatic gun in New Vegas originally had a much higher spread when firing, and were comically inaccurate as a result. Patch 1.3 would reduce the spread of nearly every automatic gun in the game. I say nearly every weapon, because Dead Money's automatic rifle kept its terrible spread and was never updated. Josh Sawyer revealed why the auto rifle was never changed. The automatic rifle is in DLC, and therefore effectively cannot be patched. Sometimes it is possible to fix an error introduced by a DLC by addressing it in the core game updates, e.g. the companion terminal introduced by the last patch fixes various companion issues found in the DLCs. But actually loading in an additional ESP to address an issue in a DLC ESM typically isn't possible due to load order differences / inconsistencies between platforms. Believe me, if it were easy to patch the DLCs across platforms, we'd definitely do it. In cases where the DLC has some catastrophically bad issue, e.g. like the pit's missing asset bugs, we may re-upload the entire DLC, but in that case users are getting an entirely new ESM, not a patch. Plasma, pulse grenades, and dynamite all had a much smaller explosive radius originally, making them much more difficult to use. Even worse, the splash damage perk was set up incorrectly and had no effect, making explosive weapons much less effective. The Fat Man was much worse in the original release too, and Josh Sawyer elaborated on how it was changed. An even more extreme case is the Fat Man. In the original release of FNV, the Fat Man did pretty modest damage, but it still weighed a ton. The patch version increased the damage a lot, and the Gunrunner's arsenal introduced low-end ammo for it, but ultimately its use wasn't particularly tactical. For 99% of all fights, players kept the Fat Man jammed in their back pockets, only pulling it out when they effectively didn't want to fight. Even after these buffs, the Fat Man in New Vegas is still significantly less powerful than its counterpart in Fallout 3, unless you score a direct hit, which isn't an easy thing to do at range. The field of view while looking down sights was improved during this patch too. The Silence 22 was pretty much useless originally. In this clip, it can't even one-hit a NCR engineer, which made it one of the worst weapons in the game. Josh Sawyer revealed why it was changed so drastically. Another example of this is the Silence 22 pistol. Before it was patched, it was just a terrible weapon. Post-patching, it's a good weapon for a very specific character build, but its value, very high crit damage, is not effectively communicated to the player. It also doesn't have a broad enough appeal for players to use it if they aren't using an ultra stealth crit build. The minigun had a large number of bugs that weren't present in Fallout 3. The firing sound could continue playing well after the player stopped shooting, or just not play at all. The ammo pack on the player's back would sometimes continue to appear even after the player unequipped it. After holstering it, it would sometimes remain floating beside the player. Weapon mods were extremely rare and couldn't even be found at the Gunrunner store. A patch 6 months after release made them much more common though. Josh Sawyer made many of these changes personally, and later explained his reasoning behind all of the balance changes to FNV's weapons. Players typically respond well to difficulty that moves on a roller coaster over the course of a game. If a single weapon or a set of weapons allows the player to crest and effectively coast through the rest of the game, it's often a less enjoyable experience. There's also a fundamental question to ask: is balance important at all? If so, then it should be done as well as is reasonably possible. Most of the balance tweaks I made for the last patch were done on my own time after normal work hours or on weekends. I am not responsible for designing or maintaining areas or quests, so the changes I made did not subtract, if you will, from time devoted to other issues. Companions went through massive changes as well. It was once possible to use companion weapons without the use of mods. For instance, you could enter a casino, have your companion's weapons confiscated, leave the casino, and in some cases you'd wind up with their weapons. While they could be equipped, companion weapons fire projectiles that normally can't be found, a special type of ammo called magical companion ammo. However, this ammo could actually be looted from dead companions in certain circumstances. Boone's Scope Sniper Rifle is my favorite companion weapon due to its battle-weathered makeshift appearance. A patch added in a script to check the player's inventory for companion weapons and magical companion ammo. If either are found in the final game, they're automatically removed. The casino script that returns items to companions could once remove their unique companion weapons from the game entirely due to an oversight. This could remove all of their other weapons you happen to give them as well, resulting in Boone having to fistfight. In the original release, it was possible to complete both Cass's companion quest Heartache by the Number and the quest Birds of a Feather during the same playthrough. That's because telling Ranger Jackson about the Van Graff's crimes during the quest Heartache by the Number didn't turn the Van Graffs hostile. A patch would later make the Van Graffs permanently hostile if the player tells Ranger Jackson, implying that the Van Graffs somehow discovered the courier betrayed them, and giving some actual consequence to the player's decisions. As a result, it's impossible to complete both quests in the same playthrough in the final game. There was a bug where non-human companions like Eddie, Rex, and Lily would randomly enter combat with nearby non-hostile NPCs. It seems that Arcade's rant that occurs after speaking to Caesar was supposed to occur inside the tent originally. After it was decided that companions couldn't enter Caesar's tent, Arcade's rant was cut and wasn't added back into the game until a patch 6 months after release. One of the developers left a note about restoring this scene, and how Arcade could somehow overhear the conversation, despite being nowhere near it. Eddie's upgraded weapon was originally red, and was significantly less effective, making him the worst companion in the game. A patch changed his laser into a blue energy projectile, but more importantly increased the damage, firing rate, and crit chance, making him a much more viable companion. The companion dismissal terminals weren't in the game at launch, and were only added in because of how often companions would completely disappear. It was a regular occurrence for companions to suddenly disappear and never be found again, so these terminals were later added to Gunrunners and the Lucky 38. Josh Sawyer talked about this in a Formspring post. They are brute force methods to allow users with older save games to reset their companions. Some legacy bugs would otherwise permanently screw up the game state, even if patches had subsequently fixed what caused the error. These issues plagued the game long enough for players to discover a workaround though. At some point it was discovered that the elevator inside Vault 22 would strangely teleport companions even if they were waiting or lost. This glitch was eventually patched too though. Many quest items were bugged in the original release and couldn't be dropped, sold, or removed from the player's inventory after completing or failing the related quest. This wouldn't have been that bad, but many quest items that weighed nothing in the final game actually had weight originally, for example, the Platinum Chip. Due to this, the player had their carry weight permanently decreased just for playing the game. During the quest Restoring Hope, the player helps the NCR at Camp Forlorn Hope attack the Legion at Nelson. The number and type of NCR NPCs that help the player assault Nelson is controlled by a morale point system. The player earns morale points from completing parts of the quest in specific ways, and the more points they have, the better the quality/quantity of soldiers that support them. For example, starting the battle with 0 points will result in the player being joined by 2 NCR soldiers. If the player has 4 points, they'll get 4 NCR soldiers. Getting the best type of soldiers in the final game requires 9 points, but in the original release it required 10. Which was impossible to attain just by completing objectives at the camp. The 10th point could only be attained by also completing the quest Return to Sender, but this information was never communicated to the player, making it needlessly confusing. That's seemingly why Return to Sender was altered to provide no points later on, and the number of points needed was reduced to 9. Many of FNV's creatures were also altered in patches. For example, Cazadores had the highest combat radius possible in the engine, 10,000 units. Combat radius is defined as the radius around the combat start location / last hit location that the actor should not pursue their targets beyond. To put 10,000 units into perspective, each increment of 64 units on this ruler measures 1 yard. The default height for NPCs is 6 feet or 128 units. The world map is broken up into cells, and each cell is 4,096 units. 10,000 units is the equivalent of 455 feet, meaning they chase the player to the ends of the wasteland. This is also the maximum range of some weapons. Cazador combat radius would later be significantly reduced in a patch to 4,000 units. In the final game, Cazador Poison deals 5 damage per second for 30 seconds to all NPCs and creatures, except for companions. Originally, the poison would knock companions unconscious, they'd wake up, then immediately pass back out because of the poison damage, potentially cycling between passing out and waking up for a long time before the effect ended. Their damage to companions was later altered to alleviate this issue. Making matters even worse, if you used a stim pack on a companion affected by Cazador poison, it would actually decrease their health rather than increase it. In the final game, the Cazador poison sound effect only plays when the player is stung. Originally though, the Cazador poison sound effect would play globally every single time any NPC or creature was poisoned, even if they were well outside the player's line of sight. One advantage that players had over Cazadors originally was that they weren't marked as flying creatures, which meant that you could use mines against them. Deathclaws originally had a damage threshold of 30, but this was deemed too difficult and their DT was later reduced to 15. While the patches fixed countless bugs, they also introduced some new ones in the process. The 1.2 patch introduced an issue where any creature could randomly become essential, making them invincible in combat. Thankfully, this was corrected in a future patch. Certain characters like Oliver Swanwick were set to respawn in the original game. This means you could kill him, wait a few days, return to Nipton, and then kill him all over again. Unfortunately, this oversight was fixed in a patch. This patch also made many minor NPCs become disabled after their quests are completed. In the original release, completing the quest Don't Make a Beggar of Me would permanently disable Melissa. Melissa is an integral part of the Great Khan's questline, as the player must receive support from 3 of Papa Khan's 4 advisors to break their allegiance with the Legion. A patch would later leave her enabled, and she travels back to Red Rock Canyon after the completion of her quest. A bug once occurred when loading a save, and it would always change the in-game day to Sunday. This may not seem like a big deal, but vendor inventories only refresh every 3 days, which meant you'd either have to play or wait for 3 in-game days for vendors to get new items. Since it reset every time you loaded a save, you could theoretically play through the entire game without any vendors getting new items. The Lucky Shades item gives the player +1 to luck, and the item is arguably the best reason to side with the Legion. While the all-purpose science suit provides a +5 bonus to the player's science skill and looks really dope. In the original release though, neither of these items were placed anywhere in the game world. They were later added to the Legion safe house and the Follower safe house in a patch. In the original release, the NCR safe house had no items inside of it. This was corrected by the patch that came out a day after release, so few players probably ran into this issue, but it was still a pretty huge oversight. One of the items added here in the 1.1 patch was a box of 44 special rounds. Before this, 44 special rounds never appeared in the game world, as they weren't placed anywhere, they weren't on any vendor list, and the ammo type can't be crafted. So for several months after release, this box was the only time it could ever be found. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Many other types of ammo didn't appear anywhere in the game world, revealed, like 38 special ammo, 20 gauge magnum shells, 12 gauge coin shot, and more. There were many items that could originally only be acquired by killing the NPCs who had them. Some of these items were added to safe houses in a patch, and Josh Sawyer revealed the reasoning behind it. Forcing people to kill the owners of unique items that are part of the core story to get those unique items is not great. Similarly, not giving those characters unique items in the first place is bad. Over and over and over again, we have seen players bend over backwards to get those items. They want those items because they look cool and are valuable stat-wise. We, the developers, put time into making the assets, so we should make them available to the player. This is why these safe houses were filled with low-condition, faction-relevant items in a patch. Judah Krieger used to have different AI packages, but he'd often glitch out and use the wrong one, causing him to head to the Remnant's bunker, potentially breaking Arcade's companion quest. The character that Judah plays chess with in Westside used to be an entirely different NPC. They also had problems with their AI, and were replaced at some point during the patch process. The AI packages of Prim residents were completely deleted and replaced in a patch, and the reasons for this change were never elaborated on. 3 of the powder gangers outside the Bison Steve and Prim were cut out by a patch. There were also 3 additional bloatflies to the north of Prim, but they were disabled as well. Bloatflies also had an issue where they couldn't attack the player in some circumstances. The attack animation would play, but no projectile would be fired. Josh Sawyer expanded on why so much was cut and changed in patches. Memory usage almost always goes up. Some areas will reset contents after 3 game days, but a lot of stuff lingers. Additionally, we also have to deal with persistent references. These are objects that are immediately loaded with the game because we need to be able to reference them anywhere/everywhere in the world, even if the player is nowhere near the object. Characters are the most common example. All of the companions need to be able to move around the world, even when they are not in your current area, so they are all persistent references. All object data, excluding art assets like NIFs and audio assets for persistent references, is loaded in at all times. So that's more or less a permanent chunk of resident memory. The number of persistent references invariably goes up with each DLC, so as the number of DLCs increases, the system has less and less memory available. Of course, the player's save game file only gets bigger and bigger, since he or she is going through more and more areas, manipulating an increasingly large number of objects. This is why some of our later patches actually remove content from the core game, e.g. Prim. Even though we had balanced the memory footprint for the core game, DLC content was pushing down the available resources. When Old World Blues was released, one of the concessions they were forced to make was switching a huge number of full-bodied skeletons into torsos, like this dude in the cave near NCR Correctional Facility, or this little guy outside Quarry Junction. Legion and NCR hit squads are sent after the player if they receive enough negative reputation with their respective factions. They used leveled lists that made them more difficult in the original release, but new lists were introduced for the raised level caps of the DLCs, and these have an easier difficulty curve. They were also altered to make their appearance more consistent, and in an effort to reduce memory usage, their outfits were changed to less memory-intensive clothing. Perhaps most notably, hit squads rarely ever appeared originally. During the entire time I spent making this video, I was only attacked by a single Legion hit squad, despite being vilified by both the Legion and NCR. Their rate of attacking the player was drastically increased by a patch though. In fact, they had so many issues that their entire code was heavily reworked. Caravan was totally broken at launch. In the final game, merchants will only play a limited number of games with the player, but these limits didn't exist in the initial release. Even further, there was a bug where NPCs couldn't play face cards on the player's stack, making it nearly impossible to lose if you understand the rules of Caravan. These bugs in tandem could easily be exploited for an economy-breaking number of caps. Josh Sawyer revealed how patches were handled at Obsidian. Bugs are prioritized by severity, meaning crash bugs first, then crit path bugs, then crit path quest bugs, then major quest bugs / gameplay bugs, then minor quest bugs and tuning. From the consumer's perspective, there's just a large mass of people working on bugs, but in reality, individual members either should not fix or are not capable of fixing any given bug that's in the list. For example, a programming bug would not be assigned to a designer, and a design bug would not be assigned to an artist. Even within a discipline, certain people are suited to fixing certain bugs. I do all weapon tuning because I did almost all of the weapon implementation. Quest designers fix their own quest bugs because they have the most intimate familiarity with how the quest is structured. Assigning a critical quest bug to any warm body who happens to be occupying a chair can result in a lot of inefficiency, and often new bugs created by the attempt at a fix. Similarly, there are idiosyncrasies to how some sections of game code work that really demand the attention of one or two programmers. Throwing new programmers at the problem would likely result in them spending twice as long orienting themselves and possibly making some poor engineering decisions. So yeah, New Vegas was really broken. The content covered in this video only represents a small fraction of the patch changes. Being this broken didn't stop people from playing New Vegas though. It offered such a unique world filled with brilliantly written characters, well-designed quests punctuated by morally ambiguous choices, and a level of player agency that few games have come close to matching, which made these bugs more forgivable to many players, myself included. These changes made FNV into a more stable, much better game, solidifying its legacy as one of the very best RPGs ever made.